Hey everyone, Phobos here with another build for you, and this time it is a Totem Freezing Pulse Elementalist, and this is a build I've been working on for a little bit and I've finally perfected, so I wanted to make a video and share it all with you guys. One thing to get into though, or one thing to state before we get into the nitty gritty of the build is that this is not intended to be a tier 1 build. And what do I mean by that? Well, it doesn't have the clear speed of something like Cosper's Discharge or False Spark. And while it can kill Guardians, it doesn't have the consistent Guardian killing capabilities of something like Essence Strain. You basically wouldn't build this character to farm Guardians. And that's basically because its life pool is relatively low and its primary defensive mechanic is revolving around freezing the monsters. And unfortunately, Guardians and Shaper and Theory can't be frozen, so the build loses a lot of effectiveness naturally fighting those types of enemies. And I definitely wouldn't recommend fighting them on hardcore with this build. But if that doesn't bother you and you're just looking for a solid mapping build that is a lot of fun and freezes everything on the screen, or if you just like using freezing pulse, then this build is for you. And let's dive right into the mechanics here. So I would say the goal of what we're trying to do, or what I was trying to do with this character, is to freeze everything in the game that can be frozen. So like Comb, Core Malachi, Duresso, everything like that. And to accomplish that, I, I want to do tons of damage with my freeze pulse and lower the mob's resistances as much as possible, basically. And the first item that's going to be essential in doing this is the Soul Mantle here. Now, a lot of people probably look at this item and they see the one additional totem being the best aspect of it, and the totem does add a lot of DPS, and it's great for killing bosses quickly. But the main thing we're after here is the fact that it has an implicit spell totem support. And what that allows us to do is to actually link 6 damage links to spell totem. And the links we choose are crit multi, crit, controlled destruction, cold pen, freezing pulse, and faster casting. Now the one we drop in a 5 link is the crit damage here, or if we weren't using the soul mantle, we'd have to drop the crit damage. But having the crit damage makes such a difference, and it makes it so much easier to freeze things. So that's essentially why we're using this chest. And we overcome the downside of the chest by simply running a warding on our Quicksilver and Basalt Flask. And this pretty much just means that we're always curse immune as we're running through the map, and it's never really a problem. The only time it's a problem is in specific situations against bosses with multiple phases, and even then you're doing so much damage that it's often not a problem. The only time you run into a problem is if you overfreeze the boss. So you kind of just have to pay attention to when the boss is going to phase, and then pull your totems away so the boss can actually phase without you just freezing it there and keeping it essentially freeze locked forever. And letting your blast duration and your totems time out on you and stuff like that. One important thing to note is that it's not just when a totem dies that you get the curse put on you, it's when you even kill a totem by replacing a totem as well. So that is something that should be noted for sure. Now as far as like the damage on this, so you can see like the freezing pulse damage is when you have the pendulum on, it's 99k. When it's not on, it's 86k. But then when you cast, since you get the crit, it's at 96k without pendulum and like 111 with pendulum. So it does a lot of damage per totem. Has a very high crit rate, and that's very important for getting a consistent freeze on the boss. And let me just go over the gear for you here. So we have 2 wands, fairly mediocre wands, nothing too special. The rings, you're basically looking for mana regen, and ES if you can get it. This neck is mostly damaged with a little bit of ES mixed on it. For the helm, the enchant I opted to go for was the freezing pulse projectile speed one. Now, ideally, I would have gotten the damage one. And if you're struggling freezing because you have like a 5 link or something like that, you definitely want the damage one. but I just couldn't acquire one, essentially, that was a hubris and wasn't already rolled for CI, so I had to make do with this one. But projectile speed is never really bad due to how Freezing Pulse works, because it does most damage closer to your character, and then as the pulse goes longer, it deals less damage. So giving you more projectile speed essentially allows you to stay closer to that max damage value for longer during the pulse. And we're also using Winds of Change here for more projectile speed and more projectile damage. Now let's open the tree up here. Okay, so we're using Elementalist obviously for the Ascendancy, and this node is just godly because we run a Fire Golem and a Frost Golem. Frost Golem gives us 40% damage, and it gives us 60% crit because the effect on the Golem doubles. The 40% damage comes from it matching the Elemental type. The Fire Golem gives us straight 40% damage because the effect doubles, and it normally would give 20. You could use a Lightning Golem in place of the Fire Golem, but the reason why we use a Fire Golem is because, again, it's contributing towards that freeze threshold, whereas a Lightning Golem would simply just up your DPS. Coming down this other side, we get Pendulum of Destruction. It's a decent node. It's inconsistent, but when it procs, it's amazing. And we have Mastermind of Discord, which is amazing because it's super easy to proc with Flame Dash. And you end up with why is this not changing here? Oh, because I have the, okay. There we go. Yeah, so 61% cold penetration. And so that's with the Mastermind Discord and the Cold Pen. Then we have the Frost Orb that's an extra 20 more, or Frost Bomb, excuse me. And on top of that, we have our curses. So our curses are Blasphemy with Temp Chains and Frostbite. Now, in this situation, I have the Frostbite Blasphemied, but that's just because how I have my curses set up on this character and how the links are done. Ideally, you want your Temp Chains Blasphemied because it's just a more useful curse in a majority of circumstances, and you're not really going to need Frostbite for the trash anyways. So you're just better off running Temp Chains on the Blasphemy because it's safer. But yeah, right now I have the Frostbite on there, and the Frostbite gives minus 44 or 43 or something like that. So the penetration with this build is huge. We're easily over 100. And the Frostbite, when you quality it, gives freeze duration, which we should go back into the passive tree here. This is something that we're also trying to collect. So we basically, in terms of jewels on this build, we use the Rain of Splinters, which is necessary because it eliminates our need for LMP. Which is good because it saves us from the less multiplier, as well as taking up a slot in the chest. And it doesn't really matter what percentage you get because it's a reduced and not a less. So even if you can only afford like one in the 40s, it's absolutely fine. And for the rest of the jewels, you're pretty much just looking for freeze duration and life and whatever other damage you can throw on top of it. So this is 16%, another 16. I think this is a 14. And then we have 10% freeze duration from this, since it's right next to the way we normally path. So we get like 50% from the tree and around like 20 from the curse. So we're looking at around 70% freeze duration, which is excellent for the amount of damage we're doing. It allows us to easily keep things frozen with no issues whatsoever. And one thing about the tree I'll probably notice too is that there's no power charges on the tree, and that is intentional. And the reason for that is basically because I feel like power charges are really great in lower end maps when things aren't dangerous and you can run around casting Orbistorms or in outdoor maps when things are going well. But when you're doing really difficult content in this game and you're doing like nasty map mods with really high level maps, I feel like consistently being able to use Orb of Storms is it's a bit unsafe in a lot of situations, and it can sort of get you killed more often than not. So you can definitely still use Orb of Storms to generate like your initial 3 charges, but personally I wouldn't say that it's worth it to invest heavily into charges with this build. I actually tried that initially. I had 2 Void batteries, as you can see, and I was running like 9 power charges, and the tooltip was at like 160 to 170k. It was absolutely insane damage, but in some situations you just can't keep your charges up, and when you lose your charges you go down to like 30k. It'd be a pain in the ass to get them back up. And then on a boss, if you go into a boss room without charges, your damage is severely nerfed and you can't get the freeze in the boss right away because your damage value is so low. You pretty much have to drop Orb of Storms and try and generate some charges. Whereas the way I have it now, I just walk into the boss room, I put down my totems, the boss is frozen immediately, and I'm super safe. I don't have to worry about anything like that. So that's just the way I prefer it. And you can mess around with charges if you want, but I really think ultimately that they're pretty unnecessary. As for other things, other notables, pretty much just have the Vol Lightning Trap here because it's always amazing. It definitely helps if you're having trouble freezing bosses. Another thing you can do if you only have a 5-link or if you have shitty wands is making sure you have the dual curse and both curses are on the boss. Because this build in its current state with the normal wands, I can pretty much freeze anything without temp chains. But it's super easy to freeze things with temp chains. So even if you're like, you don't have a 21 freeze pulse or you don't have a 6-link or something, it's still very easy to accomplish the freezing that's being done uh, with this build by just throwing a temp chains on there or something like that. You can also replace temp chains with elemental weakness if you want. You'll do more damage to the boss, and you'll also have a greater chance of freezing, but I just prefer temp chains because I feel like overall it's the safer option. So that's pretty much it, I think. I think I covered pretty much everything. If you have any questions or concerns or about the build, just feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And I hope you have a great day, and thanks for checking out the video. Talk to you later.